The bubble we're in right now, or the deflation of the bubble that we're in, is really almost a function of how America was actually created from its inception. The whole notion of America was highly speculative, both politically, socially, economically, going back, well over 250 years. And you have people even like George Washington, who was in fact a land speculator himself. Alexandria, Virginia was a function of just pure land speculation. George Washington himself was a surveyor. So it's almost part of the ethos of this country to own land and have home ownership. And what happens is sometimes public policy gets ahead of good economic sense, and to a large extent that's what we have going on right now. In Florida particularly, we've had tremendous growth, in part because of population increases, lots of immigration that came from South America as well as Europe and Canada, and also, of course, migration from the Midwest and from the Northeast. And the big thing that helped Florida for years was, of course, the invention of central air conditioning, and of course, the car and airplanes and just good transportation systems. And with all that, we were able to turn the Everglades into what we're sitting today, and that is just well-developed property. But things don't always stay the way they seem. Next page, please. And we've had a massive bubble, a bubble that we talked about that was coming along back in 05 already, and popped literally in sometime in 07. And I want to talk a little bit about what similarities we are seeing today and dissimilarities we're seeing today with a period of time that people are starting to talk about more and more, and that is during the period of the Great Depression. And even today, if you looked at the Wall Street Journal, the Federal Reserve is now stating unequivocally that we are in the worst economic times, and they like to always preface this by saying, since the Depression. And there are some economists out there, I'm not an economist, but I do read what they have to say, and there are a few economists out there saying that this could be worse than the actual Depression itself. And we'll see what the Obama administration actually does to make sure that this is only a bad situation since the Depression. But we are going to have to take some playbooks and some lessons out from the Depression, because there are some similarities that are occurring that we must take note of. Housing prices during the Depression fell 30%. Unemployment was at 25%. Today we're seeing unemployment in some states that now are at 10, 12%. We're seeing that in the Detroit area, Rhode Island, other pockets of the United States. Here in Florida, while unemployment is starting to increase dramatically, because we're not as wedded to large corporations that are having these massive downsizings, we're only wedded to an industry that already has been eviscerated, and that's what we talked about last time, which I characterized as the real estate industrial complex. And that complex, which includes real estate lawyers, people in banking, and people in accounting also, and title companies, and contractors and subcontractors, everyone that's in the service business that serves the industry knows what I'm talking about, because we've all been literally suffering for several years. So to some extent, our suffering going forward may be worse than the rest of the country, because the rest of the country now is hearing the alarms that we all have felt ringing here for several months and really several years already. During the Depression, the government created a whole bunch of regulatory agencies, and this is going to be very important. They created the SEC, which obviously hasn't done their job because we know what happened with Bernie Madoff. The FDIC, we have someone who's very critical of the role of the FDIC and believes that the FDIC's role should be expanded. We have HUD, that was talking about home ownership, pushed home ownership over 70%, and at the same time, the Federal Reserve and all the other regulatory agencies were completely lax as it relates to making sure that only people who could pay their mortgages would in fact receive loans. Became irrelevant to a large extent, because the idea of purely home ownership as a public policy was very important. And that public policy initially may have been a Democratic policy, but it was completely embraced by the Bush administration. And there are just plenty of speeches that were given by Bush administration officials when they would go abroad, talking about how important it was for home ownership and how proud they were that they had pushed home ownership to 70%, over 70%, which in fact was the highest that it's ever been in the United States, and probably will be the highest it will ever be for the next 100 years. Fannie Mae was created. We all know the problems with Fannie Mae, and of course it's kind of funny. I mean, Fannie Mae is in the position of basically socializing their losses and the profits end up going to the shareholders. I mean, it takes even the best day of communism and socialism and makes it its worst day. I mean, on the one hand, I mean, if you're going to socialize losses, you might as well socialize the benefits, right? But what these guys did is that they socialized the losses. So we all assume the losses, yet the shareholders of Fannie Mae and the executives who received outlandish bonuses and outlandish salaries actually were able to benefit while we continue to subsidize their losses. And it takes any type of economic theory, whether you're talking about pure capitalism or pure socialism and pure communism, and probably gives you the very worst of both. And so that's Fannie Mae, and that goes for Freddie Mac too. The FHA, again, they were pushing policy to try and push home ownership up, and again, we have a lot of issues there. Now, HOLC, this is called the Homeowners Loan Corporation. We haven't heard about these guys probably, at least in my lifetime. They may still exist, and it may be in some vestige, but we're going to talk about the importance of what that entity did during the Depression, because my sense is we will see some sort of reincarnation or recreation of the Homeowners Loan Corp, maybe by the same name, maybe by a different name, sometime down the road, based on what I anticipate from the Obama administration. Next. Hurricane Katrina. So what does Hurricane Katrina have to do? I mean, that was October 2005. And it's interesting because most of the real estate markets peaked right around that time. And when I spoke in '05, and I think it was during the summer of '05, we talked about the likelihood that there would be some sort of extrinsic event, some sort of external event that would snap the real estate bubble. We don't know what it would be. At that point, I thought maybe it could be an unfortunate, terrorist attack or some sort of gas, real gas spike that could occur. A lot of people believe that the images that occurred during Katrina and the loss of confidence as a nation that we suffered actually is what poked the hole in the bubble. Now, if it hadn't been Katrina, it would have been something else, okay? I mean, let's be candid with ourselves. But after Katrina, I know from my practice, I know from a lot of other people's practices, things were never the same. I'm not talking about Katrina hitting here. I'm talking about what Katrina hit in New Orleans and the images that were seared in people's minds. And even when you look at these, I mean, it's just remarkable images, because if you took down the words, you would not think this was the United States. You would think, how could this happen in the United States? And so I think we all lost a lot of confidence in ourselves and in our government, And I think that is what ended up poking the hole in a bubble that was already gonna pop. Next page. This was the image we used, I think, in '07, talking about, '07, when we talked about the bubble and why it was going to pop and how it was popping. And I still like Mr. Bubble. I guess I like him because I used him as a kid. I used Mr. Bubble as a kid. Okay. What was the cause of all? I think we should go back a little bit and see what happened. Okay, the dot-com bursts in 99, 2000. The Federal Reserve opens the spigot. They lower interest rates. They want to keep the economy going. And all of a sudden you have 1% interest rates between '03 and '04. And a lot of people start borrowing a lot of money, start flipping homes, start buying contracts on unbuilt condos, and speculation became rampant. Alan Greenspan, in charge of the Federal Reserve at the time, thought that was the right policy. Recently, in front of Congress, he said that maybe he overreacted. Okay, is what it is. Lax regulation. I mean, there was virtually no federal oversight. There's no federal oversight for making sure that mortgage brokers aren't criminals, making sure that they haven't committed fraud, making sure that they haven't been in jail, making sure that they've paid their child support, making sure that they haven't gone bankrupt. I mean, this is a state-by-state process, and most of the states are underfunded, don't have the method or methodology for really vetting these mortgage brokers. And in fact, they are highly undereducated, and in fact, were just the equivalent of used car salesmen. And in fact, a lot of used car salesmen fall into that same category, as many of you know. And so the reality is that we just took the worst of I think, two public policies. The Republicans of wanting to get the government off the backs of the people and having regulation completely disappear. And on the Democratic side, pushing home ownership, because with home ownership, the thought was that you get more social responsibility, neighborhoods remain stable, families stay intact. I mean, there are all these social theories that are associated with home ownership that are now proving to be completely fallacious.